Salima Jaffer, everyone, and welcome to our career exploration series, Discover Your Path Education. Thank you so much for making the time to be here today, to join us, and to learn, hopefully, for the evening. So the whole point of these series, we've had them before last year, we have a whole lineup for you this year, is to help post-secondary students, high school students, and parents better understand career exploration, career development, different industries, typical and atypical. So today our focus, as you know, is going to be on education. And we want people who are interested in the industry to understand the ins and outs of teaching, but also the depth of the industry, including adult education, not-for-profit work, and administration and project management. We want you to understand really the different areas you can get into, the skills that are required for those areas, and the labor market and future of that work. And to help us with that, we have some amazing panelists who will guide us through this. So this is going to be a 1-hour session, and before we get into it, I'd like to go into quick housekeeping activities. There is a question box, so feel free to ask any questions that come up into that box in your panel. We will try to get to as many of those questions as possible before the end of the hour. However, if there are any additional questions, we will also try to email you directly if we haven't had a chance to get to your answers. In those questions, please make sure to address it to a specific person that will help us triage it, and we can get started. So a little bit about me. I'm your moderator. My name is Natasha. I'm a graduate from the University of Toronto. I actually did my undergraduate in French and sociology. After I graduated, I worked in various not-for-profits, working with newcomers, youth, and adults in career exploration, career guidance, and job search. Then I shifted to the University of Toronto, where I worked as a career advisor, working with undergraduate and graduate students in their career exploration, labor market, job search, and overall career development. I did that for 6 years, and for the last 4 years, I've been working as a career and program development manager at the University of Toronto Mississauga's Institute for Management and Innovation, and I'm in charge of developing their new executive programs. So I myself have had a very diverse path, and that's why I think I'm so passionate in helping others understand their career development journey. Now I'd like to introduce Tasmeen. Tasmeen, please introduce yourself and give us a little bit more information about your background.
Sure, thank you, Natasha. So Yalamadat, I am Tasmeen, and I started, it feels like many moons ago, as a high school teacher in the public sector. And then I went off to London to the IIS to complete the STEP program, and I helped launch the secondary BUI system across Canada, and then moved to the Far East Asia for a few years. Launched it over there, and then I came back and I switched gears. I got into working with faculty and universities and working with curriculum development across North America through universities. And now currently I've gone to corporate education. Now I work with companies like Apple, Rogers, various banks, work on global programs, work on local programs. So teaching, but just in a little different setting. So that's me.
Thank you, Tasmeen. Next, we have Zora.
Hello, everybody. My name is Zora, and I began my career as a classroom teacher, and that was, I would say, maybe about 20 years ago. And after that, I did some graduate work at the University of British Columbia in special education, returned to the classroom a little bit, and then decided that I would see what the education sector looked like in Central Asia. So I worked with the University of Central Asia for a couple of years as a visiting fellow, training faculty and teaching courses through the Aga Khan Humanities Project. And then that led me to do a PhD at Berkeley in school psychology, which is a field that merges public health with public health, psychology, and education. And currently, I work as a vice principal of the Provincial Outreach Program for Autism and Related Disorders here in BC, where we service the public and independent schools in British Columbia in the area of autism.
Thank you. Wonderful. And finally, Salima Jaffer.
Hi, Yalimadat everyone. My name is Salima Jaffer. I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, Natasha, for this opportunity. A little bit about myself. I did my B.Ed and my M.Ed at OISE in Toronto. That led me to a number of international opportunities, including the IDM Fellowship through the Aga Khan Foundation Canada. I was in Uganda for about a year working on an early childhood education project there. I also taught both before and after receiving my B.Ed. I taught in Tanzania for a year. I also taught in England. And when I came back to Canada a few years ago, I made a shift, using my education background, made a shift to working in international development at first in Canada, and then working to various nonprofits that are focused on work in Canada. And so I've been doing that for a number of years, everything from working with Indigenous entrepreneurs based in Toronto, but working with them around the country. And most recently, I've taken on some project management work with Canada Learning Code, which is a national nonprofit that delivers coding education primarily focused on women-identified folks, but also expanded to girls, to teens, and to teachers as well.
Amazing. Thank you so much. I think those bios in themselves help us understand really how much depth there is to the industry and how many different pathways there are in education. Thank you for that. So at this point, I'm going to ask Tasmeen and Zora to turn off the cameras, and we'll be asking each panelist individual questions based on their specific experience. So thanks, Salima, again. So my first question to you is, both from an educational standpoint and experience standpoint, you have a lot of experience working in various not-for-profits, which I think is really cool. I have the same experience, and I know how enriching it is. Can you tell me how you've seen growth opportunities and challenges in working in not-for-profit? Because we do know it is a little bit different than working in a private sector or a larger corporation. So can you please talk about your experience and like I said, the pros and cons?
Sure. So we have there are various growth opportunities, various pros working with nonprofits, and of course the flip side, which we'll get to shortly. My personal experience, many of the nonprofits I've worked with have been fairly small nonprofits, particularly those based in Canada have been, a staff of maybe 20 people or under, and that's led to some exciting opportunities, some really interesting projects. For example, I worked with an organization that partners with the federal government to deliver community citizenship ceremonies across Canada. Being a French speaker and being the most senior French speaker on my team at the time, I actually got an opportunity to do a radio interview with CBC Radio Canada, and sharing stage panels with some high-profile individuals has also been pretty exciting. The diversity of nonprofits, referring to really the various industries that nonprofits work in, everything from, as we've talked about, education to livelihoods, to working with entrepreneurs, to working in technology, to working in sports and athletics. So nonprofits, there's such a range in Canada, and having an education degree really gives you a bit of an into what those look like, particularly if those are networks that you're looking to grow. Another one, a pro, and can also be a challenge as well, you're not limited to the function of your job title. So for example, in the past, I've been a project officer, I've been a program manager, I've been a project manager, and all of these are very vague and mean many things. Which has led to a number of growth opportunities. When I came back, when I was working with War Child Canada, for example, my role was a project officer, but I was also managing multi-million-dollar budgets for projects that were in Sudan and South Sudan, and not necessarily something that I had the knowledge or the background in. And so you learn as you build out those projects. Another example of that would be when I worked in community citizenship ceremonies. A lot of that encompassed, though I was a manager of partners, and that included partners across 40 or 50 national partners in different parts of the country. It also included a big chunk of event planning, for example. And so really a job title it can be very limiting, and yet it can be quite all-encompassing as well. And the reason I say it's a pro is because you really develop your skills very, very quickly when you're in those roles. And at the same time, and I do have this under the cons, is that you don't necessarily have the training or the know-how to perform all of those functions. So you do pick it up as you go along. And I mentioned here that nonprofit work often, at least in my experience, has allowed for travel. When I was working in international projects, I did have the chance to travel and live in East Africa, and sort of southeastern Africa as well. I lived in Zambia working on a health education project for a number of months. And then when I shifted my focus to working with Canadian nonprofits, I visited provinces that I had never been to before. When I currently with Canada Learning Code, I had the chance to go up to Nunavut and participate in some coding workshops up there. And so in the last few years, I've actually managed to visit every single province and 2 of the 3 territories in Canada, and that's something that I'd never been before. So it really helped me develop quite an appreciation for my own country, and not necessarily places I would have thought of visiting on my own time. And that has really led to the chance to build strong networks. You know, it's really interesting. Toronto is quite a small city, and when I started my current role, I realized that my current boss knew my old boss, both based in Toronto and with different nonprofits again. So the networks in Toronto with nonprofits are very small, even when they are nonprofits that work across the whole country. And because I am Toronto-based, there is a lot more that is here. But of course, I know not all of you who are tuning in may necessarily be in this country, or sorry, in this city. But in the current climate, you can live anywhere in this country and bring a different mindset. One of the challenges with working with Toronto-based nonprofits that work across the country are they're very it's a very Toronto-centric mindset. And so it's always an advantage to come from a different city and with a different background. So some of the cons, I've alluded to a couple of them. One big one for sure is that is often unstable work. I've done a lot of contract work, sometimes 6 months, 9 months, sometimes a year. And so that can definitely be a challenge. It can be difficult to find a permanent role, and a role that pays you what you're qualified for. So it does take some time to get into that sort of position. And that is related very much to the fact that a lot of your time might be spent on writing project proposals and doing research for those project proposals. With some organizations that I've been with, I spent more time report writing and project proposal writing than actually implementing the work.
So you're actually writing your proposals to justify your position, essentially, and justify the projects that you're working on?
Yeah, that's one way of putting it for sure, and getting the funding to do those projects. And a challenge to that can also be that sometimes the organization has to pivot towards where the funding dollars lie, which is not necessarily where that nonprofit has its expertise. And it can also become a bit of a numbers game. So funders, whether it's government, whether it's corporate, they like to see numbers. They like to see the more people who benefited from your project, which may mean that the quantity of people impacted becomes more important than the quality of that impact. So certainly a challenge. I talked about the it can be demanding with the need to wear many hats. I don't think that those who don't work in nonprofit often realize that the hours can still be very, very long. I know they are long in the corporate world, and they can be very long in the nonprofit world, especially when you're taking on 5 or 6 different roles. And then the lack of diversity. I have found, this is my personal experience, working with Canadian nonprofits in Canada, or those Canadian nonprofits that work outside of Canada, there can sometimes be a bit of a lack of diversity at the top, and that affects and that impacts the programs and the projects and the policies that the organization can choose to take on. So that can certainly be different.
I think that's a really good point. I know lately, especially looking on LinkedIn, there's a lot of jobs in corporate around diversity and inclusion, and I don't think nonprofit has necessarily caught up. I've worked in nonprofits, even with newcomer agencies and settlement agencies, and at the top, it's exactly what you said, a lack of diversity. So I think the industry definitely needs to catch up there. We have 2 more minutes, so I'm going to ask my last question. I think it's a really important one. So additionally, though you aren't directly teaching, how has your BEd and your MEd helped you in your career development? So again, we have about 2 minutes for that one.
Sure, I'll keep it quick. So I'll just focus on a couple of them. One, the BEd and the MEd, I did them both at OISE. The program I did at OISE was comparative and international development education. So really that launched me off into working in international development, which I thoroughly enjoyed when I was living and working abroad. And I'd mentioned the networks as well. So the networks at OISE are huge. People are all over the world. People are all over Canada. And so keeping up those networks has and continues to be a really big part of my career and my career advancement. Another piece I would say is having those degrees, even if you're not teaching directly, they do give you the proof or the evidence that you have that experience working in education. And should you choose, for example, for me, working on projects that relate to education, even though I'm not directly teaching, I can show my BEd, I can show my MEd, and I can say, look, I have experience in education. I'm not teaching, but I can implement these projects because of this experience that I have taken on. So those are 2 really big pieces. And finally, the third, I would say, it's not just about teaching is important, and I love teaching, I've done it. But those degrees allow you to go outside of just teaching. What you think of as a classroom teacher, you can work in adult education, curriculum design, policy making. Those degrees really allow you a lot of flexibility to work in various sectors of education. And finally, this year I've realized over the last number of years, I've done a lot of project management. So this year I worked towards my PMP, which is the project management professional. So that combination of education and the project management gives me a lot of opportunity to move within the world of nonprofit or outside.
That is amazing. Thank you so much, Salima. I loved how you alluded to the MEd being applicable. There's so many different streams in MEd. So I know that there were a couple of questions in the registration about working in higher education as a career counselor, either at a university or college, and even just generally in those post-secondary institutions. MEds are extremely valued. So thanks for bringing that up. Thanks so much for all your insights. I think we got a lot out of these few minutes. You can turn your camera off and we'll see you at the round table. Thank you so much. Okay, on to the next speaker. So I am going to ask Tasmeen to please turn on her camera. She's in the hot seat now. Tasmeen, thanks so much again for being here. So I'm going to jump right into the questions. You started off first as a secular teacher, and I think a lot of people who are watching today are probably thinking they're going to go down that path. So I'm happy that we have you here. Then moved on to a step teacher and did that role for quite some time until you made a shift. So my first question is just generally around teaching. Can you please tell us more about working as a teacher? And then, as I won't interrupt you, my second question is, what were the differences between working as a step teacher and working in the public school system for people who are kind of deciding which path to take?
Sure, I'll choose my answer for both of them together because I think we've all read the many lists of what makes an inspirational teacher and what makes a good teacher. And what I want to focus on is the responsibility that comes with it. So as a secular school teacher, I felt very responsible for the intellectual and emotional development of my students. And I know it takes a village to raise a child, but you play a huge role in every student's life. You interact with them, you are their role model, you are there in front of them every day representing what adulthood looks like. So the students really look up to you for many things. As a step teacher, that burden got heavier, because now we were also responsible for their spiritual growth. And with this curriculum, the IS curriculum that came out, this was new. This was new for our parents. This was new for their grandparents. So it wasn't that we were only teaching the students in front of us, but we were teaching the families. There were nights where I was in the classroom and parents would come in and say, you know, you sent this homework, but I have a question. And we'd have a conversation. So it was, that burden was heavy. But with that burden, I think came a lot of purpose and a lot of fulfillment as well. So in the classroom, in the secular world, you do feel that sense of fulfillment. And I never wanted to leave the classroom when I first started. And when I got pulled into this step, then I never wanted to leave that classroom. But I guess you go where you need to be and where, you know, where you have to be to meet the needs of the world today. And I think you're just guided in that direction. So I would say the responsibility is the biggest difference, but a teacher is a teacher, and the lists are comparative.
That's great. Thank you so much for that answer. I get that must have been a little bit of a shift for you. My next question, just understanding teaching a little bit. What were your daily tasks as a teacher, and generally some pros and cons about teaching?
So teaching can be seen as you can go and teach, or you can be really passionate about teaching. And if you're passionate about teaching, it looks very different. There are long hours. The work never stops. I think I plan 24 hours a day because you're constantly thinking about that one student that isn't getting it, or that one student that needs special attention, or how can this content relate to this person who's not interested? And so you're constantly planning. On top of that, if you're engaged with your students, they'll convince you to volunteer for all the clubs they're running and all the fundraisers and all the events. So your mornings start really early, your lunch isn't really a break, and your days go on. So they're long hours. It's a lot of work. The more confident you are in your content, the more creative you get to be. But that also takes time. So planning takes a lot of time. So there's a lot of work behind it, but if you're passionate, it drives you. I'm not a morning person, but when I was in the classroom, I would be up at 6 a.m. and ready to be in the classroom, and I would do what it took to get my energy up there for my students. So it's the pros and cons, I think that they weigh out. It's a lot of work, but it's very fulfilling. I still have students who message me years later telling me how I've impacted their life, or how something we talked about in the classroom changed the direction of what they wanted to do. So I don't think that can be compared to any con that comes with the workload. And
that must be such a good feeling, especially if you're a passionate teacher. And I think we've all had teachers that, you know, you can tell when someone's in front of a classroom whether they're the passionate teachers or they're just there to teach, right? And it makes a big difference. So yeah, I hear that in your voice.
If you're in it for the summer holidays, it's definitely not worth it. There's a lot of work that goes into it, so there's got to be something else that pushes you to it.
Perfect.
And
yeah. Okay, my next question. So do you have any tips for any students, whether they're high school students or post-secondary students, thinking about going into teaching?
Be passionate about it. If you're not passionate about it, it's going to be a lot of work. It takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of mental, emotional energy on top of the regular workload. You're in front of a classroom of 30 students who have different needs, who are asking questions, who are pushing you. It's a challenging position to be in. And if you aren't committed to it, it's going to be tough. So just make sure you're in it for the right reasons, and you'll be good. You'll be good, and you'll be driven by the students' energy then.
Yeah, and I think that there's different ways to understand if you are passionate about it. You can volunteer, you can become a tutor, you know, in your undergrad. You can even become a BUI teacher just to get your feet wet to see if this is something that you want to do. Would you agree with that?
It's funny you said that, because back in the day when I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, teaching was not even on my radar. I come up from a family of teachers, and I had said, I don't want to be a teacher. My mom was a teacher. She always made me do my homework, and I didn't want to go down that path. But I started teaching BUI, and that's what took me into this path, because I really enjoyed my Saturdays. And I said, this is something that I could do every day. And I'm so glad I took that road, because I'm so happy in my career today.
Amazing. Great to hear. Last question, and we have about a minute and a half for this. You're not in teaching anymore. However, you had many years and some great experiences in that area. How did that experience as a teacher in the classroom help you in future roles outside of the classroom in your design experience and forward from there?
Oh, absolutely. I think the skill set that we develop in the classroom, any executive or senior leadership would aspire for. Just the strategic thinking behind curriculum development, or the program management behind lesson planning and classrooms, organizations, people management skills, you're managing time, you're managing different needs, you're managing so many things at the same time that most people managers don't have in their regular life. You're presenting to 30 different people at a time at least, or if not more, with different needs and different requirements, and you're trying to juggle all of that. You're creative, you are interesting, because if you're not interesting, maybe in a boardroom that might work, but in a classroom it doesn't. So you need those strong emotional intelligence skills, you need people skills. Those skill sets can be placed in any room, and I think you'd be successful because of that.
Well, I will say your public speaking skills have definitely shown, because you've done a great job on answering your questions. So thank you so much, and you can turn your camera off for now until the roundtable. And last but not least, we're just going to move on to our final panelist, Zora. Zora, if you don't mind turning on your camera if you're still there. Great, there you are. Thanks so much for joining us, and I'm just going to launch right into the question. Really, you know, your LinkedIn, when I came across your profile, it was incredibly impressive. You have a wealth of education, being a PhD, as well as in your experience. I know starting off our careers, myself included, we think that we have to choose this one path, and I think a lot of people sitting in this virtual classroom today think, hey, if I select that I'm going to be a teacher, I'm going to be a teacher until I retire, and I'm married to it really for life. And that really isn't true. And you're a great example of that. So can you please let me know more about your journey from going to a teacher, to the educational consultant, to a school psychologist, to a provincial vice principal, and other activities in between? Why did you make the various pivots that you did? And how did you know that you should? There's already a question in the chat box that I saw about this. How do you know that it's time to make a change? And what did your career transitions teach you along the way? So what would you say to a recent graduate being open to career shift?
Well, thank you very much, Natasha, for having me. It's really a delight. You know, I did not aspire to become a school psychologist or a principal or vice principal early on in my career. I really felt that I would be a lifetime career teacher. And the irony is that I am now both. I did find, starting off in my career as a classroom teacher, I would see school psychologists walking through the halls, and I just found that you know, the idea of doing cognitive assessments every single day and reporting on them was really a mundane way to spend my day. So I immediately dismissed that idea. And I was working in a low-income community school at that time, spent several years there. And, you know, like I said, the irony is that I now do both. And what I had learned from that, now looking back, having dismissed both of those career options early on in my career, and then circling right back to those career options, I realized that I actually did not know what I did not know. And I think the best way for me to explain that is, you know, I was thinking about this little model I've got here up on the screen that I hope will be really helpful for those who are considering a career in education, to sort of use this model as a way to reflect on and really provides a systematic way of looking at career opportunities within the field of education. So first of all, in the first box, you're populating that box with information about what you know. So that's the knowledge that you are secure in. I know that that teaching is, you know, something that you do 5 days a week. You have your summers off. I know that I need an undergraduate degree in education. I know what, you know, being a classroom teacher sort of looks like and sounds like. So this is all the information that you know. In the second box, it's populating that information. It's with all of those things that you know that you don't know. So for example, these are questions that you have about the field of education. Well, I know that there are opportunities in nonprofit, but I don't know what they are. I know that, you know, vice principals and principals run a school, but I don't exactly know all the things that they do. And so here you're actually asking the questions about the general knowledge that you have about the field. In the third box, it's, I don't know, I don't know that I actually know that. So for example, this is where you move into this whole self-discovery phase. So, you know, we've all had those experiences where we've seen a job opportunity or a service opportunity and you think, wow, that sounds so great, but you know what? I don't think I could do that. I don't know if that's for me. I don't know if I have the skills. But once you do actually take the risk and you take the plunge and you try it out, you actually discover that you can add a lot of value to that role, whether it's in the nonprofit sector or whether it's in teaching and education. And so that's where you would populate all of your surprises and your self-discoveries along the way. And then your final quadrant is the I don't know what I don't know. And that's where I was stuck. And it's that blind spot that you think you know what the field of education is about, but there's so much that you don't know, and you're not going to ask questions about it because you think you know. And when you don't ask questions about it and you don't learn and you don't read about all the different opportunities, it will always remain your blind spot. And then you'll realize, you know, 10 years later that you actually may have missed out. And so that's how I would approach the field of education. And what I can do is sort of share a little bit about my journey, and then you can sort of maybe reflect on your journey, and also think about how these apply to the journey for me. So I started off in a low-income community school. I had a classroom where there was a high percentage of students who were at risk of school failure. These were children who, you know, had disabilities. They had children. These were children who were immigrants and refugees. They came from low-income families, single-parent homes, and they were really struggling. Parents children whose parents were, you know, were struggling with drug addiction, and I had them all in my classroom. And despite my best efforts and all the knowledge that I had gained in my undergraduate degree in education, there was a segment of my classroom that my classroom was not enough of a protective environment for them. And so, struggling with these questions and frustrations, I decided that I would return to school and do a graduate degree and find some answers. And I did find some answers, and I returned to the classroom, implemented what I had learned, and found some really positive results, and gained a lot of fulfillment, a lot of satisfaction. But then I thought to myself, I wonder what this looks like in other parts of the world. If I was going to apply this knowledge and this skill that I have had the privilege of gaining to another part of the world where children every day are facing these, you know, risk factors, where there are regions of the world that have been affected by conflict, where poverty is pervasive, would these skills and would this knowledge still apply? And that's what led me to the University of Central Asia and, you know, training faculty, meeting and teaching students, volunteering my time with Aga Khan Education Services in Tajikistan and Afghanistan. And unfortunately, I ended up with more questions, because as much of what I had learned did apply to those parts of the world, I had a lot of additional questions where I simply didn't have answers for. And so I was continually frustrated and decided that that's when I would go back to school and pursue a PhD. So which PhD do you decide to do? You know that it's in education, but which PhD program is going to answer some of those questions? And as I did some investigating and I did some exploring, I realized that I am both a scientist, because I love research, I love asking questions, I love investigating things and analyzing things. But at the same time, I really love being a practitioner and I really love being in the field. So how do I do both with a doctoral degree? And those questions, all the roads kept converging towards the field of school psychology. And as much as I was trying to avoid becoming a school psychologist, that was the one degree that enabled me to be both a scientist as well as a practitioner. And so I completed that degree, returned to Vancouver, and once I returned to Vancouver, because I had been exposed to different regions of the world and applying my knowledge and my skill, and now had completed a degree that enabled me to take sort of a systems level approach, I was really interested in exploring that. And so when I returned to Vancouver, I decided, you know, there's a vice principalship position with the provincial outreach program for autism. I have an opportunity to really look at education at a regional level and really make, you know, larger scale change. And so that's what I decided to do. And so now I wear both hats. I am both a school psychologist, continuing to do diagnosis and assessment and consultation, while at the same time also get to be, you know, get to look at systems level change from a multidisciplinary perspective. So, you know, the key messages here are, you know, how much the field of education really does extend beyond the classroom to include public health, psychology, human development, generally speaking. And I think both of the panelists before me really, you know, alluded to that and even explicitly stated that. And to always approach the profession as a learner, because when you do that, then you're always humble in your role, and there's always much more to learn, more to investigate, and you will always, you know, you will continue to excel and advance. And the final thing I would say is, you know, we as educators are not just distributors of knowledge. We don't take other people's knowledge and convey that to our students. We are discovering knowledge every day in our classrooms and in the work that we do. And knowledge distribution really is not enough, because you're always going to be met with surprises. And it's really important to be able to construct new knowledge for our students, but also in making change at a larger scale. So you know, don't relegate ourselves to the distribution of knowledge, to really produce new knowledge and share it.
Wow, that's amazing. I love how you had these questions and you actually went back to school to learn them, and then went back to your community to make a difference. And I can imagine how much change you've made and how much knowledge construction you've made. So thank you so much for that. So that brings us to the end of the roundtable. I mean, sorry, the end of the one-on-one. We're on to the roundtables now. So I'd like all the panelists to please turn on your cameras for some more Q&A panel style, roundtable style. So we're going to be ending at 9 sharp. We have a few questions as part of the roundtable, and then we will leave a few minutes for everybody to put in their questions in the Q&A. We'll get to as many as we can, but again, I'd like to reiterate that we will answer your questions either by email or on here. So if we don't get onto it by webinar, do trust that your questions will be answered by email. Okay, so question number 1. The future of work appears to be a popular theme these days, and an important part of what we do at the board. Besides technological advancements, what other factors might contribute to the future of work? What does the labor market look like for teaching and education and the future of work? So who would like to take that question on? Zora?
Sure, I can start us off. You know, when I think of the future of work, I really, you know, I think about how the global landscape is continually changing and is so volatile. So a few examples that I'm sort of thinking about is when we think about the refugee crisis, for example. You know, there's 80 million refugees, 40%, I believe, are children under the age of 18. And so who is servicing these kids? And in these camps, and when they arrive in Canada, for example, and in other parts of the world, who is addressing the issues of interrupted schooling, for example? And the refugee crisis is not going to end. It is there and it'll be there for a while. And so, that's one area of the global landscape that we need to really think about. Another is, this statistic that really surprised me is the idea that 1.2 billion people in the world are adolescents, and these are those between the ages of 10 to 19. And I know that there are a lot of young people who are watching today. And I think, okay, you represent 1.2 billion people in the world, and the percentage of adolescents who live in high-income countries such as Canada is only 10%. And so if we consider that 90% of young people, school-aged children and adolescents live in middle and low-income countries, where are their services coming from? And certainly Salima and Tasmeen, and particularly Salima, spoke about, the international work that is required in order to be able to service many of these young people. So, I think about climate change, the impact of climate change on young people. Disproportionately, young children are being affected by climate change. And so who is providing the education to these children, communities, families about how to protect themselves from the effects of climate change? And the list goes on. So when I think of, the future of work, we want to think about it from the changing global landscape with the examples that I just described. And of course, the field that I'm in, which is autism, and the escalating rise of prevalence in this field as well. I think it's 1 in 66 now who have autism, but it was 1 in 450 like 20 years ago. So, these are the things that we want to think about at a larger scale with regards to the future of work.
Great answer. I think that was really thorough. Anybody else want to say anything?
Yeah, I'll jump in. So I know here the question says besides technological advancements, but I think we can't look at the future of work without those technological advancements, and we also have to consider what our role is when we work with the future of work. So what I mean by that is we hear a lot about the number of jobs that will be lost because of automation and because of AI, but we don't hear enough about the number of jobs that will be created. When we think about the number of jobs that will be lost, it's not often entire jobs, it's a portion of a job. And the world of technology is changing so quickly these days. I'm just thinking about what I currently do with Canada Learning Code. We're teaching people, yes, the skills of the actual tangible skills of how to code, but what's more important is how do we problem solve? How do we do things that machines can't do? How are we creative? How can we come up with a better way to live? And machines only do what we tell them to do, and they only work off the information that we feed them. So that information has to come from us, from the research that we do, from the solutions that we implement. Zora, you talked a lot about research and education and delivering education in challenging environments. Robots aren't going to come up with that. We have to come up with that, and then we need to solve these world problems by using our own brains and our own knowledge and these days, more important than learning the really tangible skills of Python or Java or Ruby, it's learning about how to work with the changing world of work and how to work with these languages that are constantly evolving and technology that is constantly evolving. So more important on a resume than having a coding language, for example, is having those critical thinking skills and having the problem solving skills, and that will take anyone, take all of us, take all of you who are listening in today farther than just having the learning stop once you know a language.
Thanks. Question 2. So we hear time and again about the purpose of education in an Islamic context, and I want to say even in an Ismaili context. Maulana Hazram's always talking about education, the importance of teachers, the importance of early childhood education, and the importance of getting an education throughout one's life. can you comment on how this played a role in your own career journey?
I think I can start that off for us. Just going off what Salima was saying, it fits in so well because we have this responsibility, and as being in a smiley, we understand that we are Khalifas on earth. We need to leave this world a better place. And now we have access to all these different things and tools, and it's only what we do with it. So technology can be great or it could be damaging. So, you know, a lot of people are saying, well, this is the worst thing that we're going virtual with the educational space, and, you know, we're going to lose students and we're going to lose communities. But there's also great things that can happen with it. You can now differentiate to meet the needs of every student in the room. You can meet the learning disabilities, whether it's autism or any other. There's so many tools that can support these students to learn in this virtual space, but if used correctly. So continuing that, if we see our purpose as lifelong learners, we have to engage with this technology, and we have to continue to understand it, continue to question it, continue to push ourselves to be able to use this to direct it to better our career and our work with the students in front of us. So there's so much I want to say about this, but I'll let others speak. I just wanted to drop in the idea of responsibility, and that comes from our faith.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, we can move on. Question number.
I can add something to that then. Sort of the idea of education as being, you know, a way to better understand God's creation, I think is a really important thing for us to keep in mind. And the fact that, you know, the idea that the more you learn, the more you become aware of the magnitude of that creation, and sort of, you know, and no matter how many sort of degrees you earn, you never fully comprehend the extent of his creation, and it's a very humbling experience. And so I think that's something that's really important. And, you know, we all know that we're born of a single soul. And so what is it? What are the aspects that really bind us together as one humanity? And I know for me in my career, that's something that has been a question of what is it that ties us all together? What are the universal moral and social principles that really bind humanity together and makes us one unit, which makes us better able to really understand each other and communicate with each other and live side by side. So
that's a great answer. And I think you just touched on the importance of choosing a career that fits your values and morals, and how much satisfaction that can really give, and how important that is when making a career decision. I think I'm going to go to the last question, fourth question. And if we have about 4 minutes for this one. What do you see are some key skills students should seek to acquire to be successful in a career in education, teaching, traditional teaching, and beyond?
I'll start this off, partly because I'm not traditionally teaching right now, and though I work in the world of nonprofit, the education experiences I've had in front of the classroom have really been fundamental in shaping the work I've chosen to take on. When I taught in Tanzania, I actually didn't even have my B.Ed yet. I came in as an intern, and the teacher that I was supposed to intern alongside didn't turn up, and I became the teacher. And I realized at that point that how much I enjoyed being in front of the classroom, and that one experience working in a different country, in East Africa, working as a teacher for that full year, really did launch my desire to pursue my B.Ed and then my M.Ed in international development and education. And that was really, for me, the starting point of my career. That was coming, you know, right out of university, my first opportunity. And so in terms of those key skills, what I really learned in Tanzania was the absolute need to be adaptable, which is huge as a teacher. I see everyone nodding. You never know what the day is going to bring. You never know what students are facing. When I've taught in front of the classroom, I've been a high school teacher, and adolescents have a whole lot to deal with, and they have a lot of emotions they're getting through every day. And it's a real need to be present and to be there, be in the classroom, and you take that throughout your career. You take that through. For me, I've taken it through the world of nonprofit. The other panelists through research and through the various career choices they've made as well. So there is that need to be adaptable. It's something you'll hear time and time again. Earlier, I also referred to problem solving and critical thinking. Both are absolutely necessary in the classroom and outside. And in terms of developing those types of skills, that adaptability, that flexibility, for me, and I'm sure the other panelists have viewpoints as well on this. For me, it's really been about putting myself in situations that are challenging. Intentionally, and working with those situations, and that is the best way and the most memorable way to grow and to build those skills and build yourself as a person. And those challenging situations, the ones that you're absolutely scared of taking on, are the ones that are most going to shape the choices you make as your career moves forward.
Great answer. And I like the idea about soft skills development. And I'd just like to reiterate that these are skills that you can develop from now, from high school, from volunteering, from getting involved in extracurricular activities, and like Salima said, being intentional in the types of situations you put yourself in part-time jobs, in being on sports teams. You're developing these, so it's not something that you have to learn in a classroom. You develop them through your life intentionally. So thanks for talking about that. Maybe one more panelist?
Just to add to that, so continuing with the idea of learning to learn, I think that's the greatest skill anybody can use in any profession today, because you're bound to change gears throughout your life. And as teaching specifically, I would say learn to fill your own cup, because teaching takes a lot out of you. You are dealing with students, you're dealing with parents, you're dealing with leadership. There's a lot of layers that are taking from you all day. So at the end of the day, you need to know how to find your peace, whether that's through prayer, whether that's through walking, or whatever it is. Fill your cup. That's a great skill to have to rejuvenate for the next day.
I think that's an amazing way to end. So we're just going to go to Q&A now. I did receive some questions, which is why I was on my phone, so please excuse me. So I'm just going to ask, there's a couple of really good ones for everyone. And I think one that I always use in all my panels is, what advice would you have given your younger self? So if you guys could take maybe 1 minute each just to answer that question, please. We could start with Zora.
I think don't make assumptions. I think sometimes we tend to observe what's in front of us, and we think that that's the extent of what that role or what that job or career option does and is. And I think that was the advice. That's the advice that I would have given my younger self. Now, certainly, I have no regrets about the journey that I took, and every step that I took was intentional. However, at that time, I think now that we have much more at our fingertips in terms of access to knowledge and information, it's much less likely that we'll make that I would have made the same assumptions now as I did back then.
Great. Salima or Tasmeen?
I would, similar to something that Zora said, I would actually refer and use my parents more. They are a wealth of knowledge. I'm very, very lucky that they're, I have a very good relationship with them, and now I talk to them about most things. But in high school, I definitely didn't, and probably into university and beyond. I remember when I got the opportunity in Tanzania, my mom didn't really want me to go, and I went anyway. But that being said, they are a wealth of knowledge. And so if you have adults in your life, if you have those who can act as mentors for you, can act as coaches that you're comfortable with, it doesn't have to be your parents, but somebody that you can bounce ideas off of, who has more experience, maybe 20 or 30 years older than you, that can really guide you, and you can share ideas with. You can be open, you can ask questions, and you can rely on for good advice. And you don't necessarily have to follow exactly what that person tells you to do or suggests that you do, but at least finding who that person is that you can talk to openly.
Great answer.
I would agree with everything that's been said, and just to add to that is, don't be afraid of change. Listen to your gut. Allow yourselves to experience those challenging moments, those challenging shifts. I know every time I've left something that's comfortable, it's been very scary, but you're guided by something greater than you. So listen to your gut, really tune into that intuition and follow that, because that will take you where you need to be. Great.
And my next question, I don't know, I guess we kind of touched on it, but it's meant for everyone. Any upcoming areas, trends that we should consider, i.e. online learning, so given COVID, if there's any major shift in industry because of it, or French? I know when I was considering teaching in my undergrad, French teachers were getting hired like that, whereas other teachers were having a little bit more difficulty. So any trends that you guys are aware of that you'd like to share with the group? I know teaching does tend to go in waves, especially traditional teaching. So even if you can comment on that and any advice you would give to anyone who might be who might be graduating when there's not as much of a demand.
I'd like to plug the field of school psychology, if I may. I have an opportunity and a platform right now to do that. I haven't met any Smiley school psychologists, but I would love to meet one. It is a growing field simply because we're understanding that education is about human development. And human development is an area that spans, as I said earlier, public health, education, as well as psychology. And we have to understand the various factors and the barriers to learning that aren't necessarily within the individual child. It is also about the context in which the child lives. It is about family relationships. It is about the systems in which the child is learning, and sort of the larger society in which they live. And it is a field that allows you to be both a practitioner as well as do investigating and diagnosis. So it is an all-encompassing field. It is one of the fastest growing fields in education because we are realizing that that education is about all of these factors that I've just described. So certainly I know that that is a trend, and if people are interested in that area, then I would be happy to respond to any questions offline about that.
I also wonder a couple of things. So Natasha, I want to pick up on something that you said very quickly, because I know we're nearly the end. You mentioned that there's less of a demand, but interestingly, for teachers at the moment, but interestingly enough, I haven't taught in a number of years, and I was previously registered with the OCT, the Ontario College of Teachers, and in the current environment, there's such a lack of teachers that I was one of many people who have not paid their dues to the OCT for a number of years, knowing that I wasn't planning on teaching. And I got an email from the OCT recently asking me to pay my dues and come back, because right now, at least in Ontario, there's a lack of teachers for the current system that we're under with the virtual learning. So I thought that was something really interesting that I thought I might mention. Natasha, as you mentioned, it ebbs and flows, so that could change again in a couple of years. The other piece, I don't, again, not being in the classroom right now, but I do feel, at least in the world of nonprofit, and I imagine in schools, because of recent events in the last number of months, those individuals who have a lot of experience with diversity issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion issues, formally and informally, I think are more and more top of mind, and there's a whole new spotlight being shown on those types of issues. It's huge in schools for sure. I believe that there is more and more research coming out about DEI in schools. And I imagine, and again, this is I'm not currently in the school system, but I imagine I've seen a couple of roles that look at diversity and equity and inclusion officers in schools or with school boards, for example. So in this case, I'm referring specifically to ethnic diversity, but of course there's diversity around accessibility and special needs and learning, and so many others. So I think that will probably start really rising in the need fairly soon, if it hasn't already.
That's a great point. Thanks so much for making that. Okay, we're at the hour, right on time. So first, I want to thank the panelists. Thank you so much for bringing your experience, your knowledge, your advice to us. We had so many people online, and I think everybody can walk away having learned a few things, and I think hopefully be better equipped to making career decisions for themselves and their children. So thank you so much. We really, really appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Again, we will get to all your questions. I just want to plug, this is a regular thing. Our next webinar is going to be in January 19th, and it'll be around media and journalism and production. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach us on the email address that's shown here. Thank you so much. You will be getting a feedback. We take a look at these forms and really try to change and shift according to what the feedback says. So please be honest in your feedback and share all your thoughts and ideas with us, what you'd like to see in the future. And for those on the East Coast, it's getting kind of late, so have a great night. And for those on the West Coast, hopefully everybody has a good dinner. Thank you so much, and Yali Madad.